This is a 4-bank set of Mikuni carbs off of a 78 Yamaha XS1100. We're going to start with a rebuild doing one of these to show you how this is done. First off is taking the drain plug off of the float bowl. Pull any fluids out, any gas out. This one's dry. Next we will be breaking loose the screws on the float bowl. I break them loose first with the screwdriver and back them the rest of the way out with a drill. These don't pop right off, there's something that catches right here, so you gotta wiggle them a little bit. Get that screw out of there. Alright, go ahead and put the bolts in the float bowl. First thing we're going to remove is the main jet. This is the main jet right here. Set that over there. Next, we'll be removing the cover for the pilot jet. Right there. This is the pilot, that's the main. Next, we will punch out the pin. This one looks like it's cracked just a little bit, so we'll be able just to it's being a little difficult. There we go. Go ahead and pull the float off. When you're doing this, make sure that you don't mess with that. That is the float height to make sure that the carb doesn't leak. Put the pin in there too. We're going to clean all that later. Next is the float needle seat. And the float needle, that is also a 10mm hex. As you can see, it's pretty tore up. Just for information's sake, the rebuild kit that we're using from Scrambler Cycle does not have a filter at the end of their thing, so we're going to reuse this filter after we clean it. And that just pops right off. So we'll set that aside so we don't lose it. Alright, we will flip over the carb to take the diaphragm cover off. Pull that single cover off, and these are spring loaded, so when you take them off there's a spring in there. So make sure you pull the spring out and be very careful when you pull these diaphragms out because they're kind of sensitive. And you see it has the needle, the main needle jet. Set that aside so we can see everything in here. Next, we're going to be removing the pilot screw. These have a tendency of breaking when you're pulling them off, so you got to be very careful with it. They're spring loaded as well, so see that one's got some junk on it. Set that aside. Next is the emulsion tube that the jet sits in, that hole right there. We're going to pull that out. The way you do that is you flip it back over. Right here is where that resides. There is a little washer in there that you got to pop out first. And then what you do is you take one of the screws that you use to take the diaphragm cover off and lightly screw it in there and kind of move it back and forth a little bit if it doesn't go all the way in the first time. And you just hit it slightly with a hammer until it pops down. So once it does that, back the screw back out. And then get something like a punch, not a screwdriver, because the screwdriver will gouge the side, and get it right on the very edge of it, and then punch it the rest of the way out. And you see it popped out the other side. This one has corroded, all sorts of junk in there. So good thing we're replacing it. The kit from Scrambler Cycle has that also. Since we have everything out, we can go ahead and start cleaning it. Remember, safety goggles when using carb cleaner. Make sure you clean in here. And this is the pilot, where the pilot jet comes out right there. So make sure you get nice and clean in there. We'll also do it from the top so you can see it. Oh, my apologies. This one's the pilot jet. You can see it kind of squirting out over here. And the top. So we're going to go start by putting the emulsion tube back in. This is the emulsion tube. It has a cut in it right here because it slides over a pin. So what I do is try to drop it in where I know the pin is, and it's movable once it gets in there. But sometimes you have to guide a little bit. When you're working with brass parts, be very careful because they are very sensitive. This one we got it right on the very first time. So I put my finger on it to make sure that we don't lose the spot. Flip it over and you see that it's right here. The new kit has a new washer that goes on top and a new jet. Go ahead and screw that on and do it hand tight, and it'll seat the emulsion tube too, like so. Put the cover back on the pilot jet. Next is the needle float. Remember, we said that it didn't come with a filter at the end, so we'll go ahead and clean the filter that was in there with some carb cleaner. Go ahead and see it snaps right on. Go ahead and put that in there. Just hand tight, and then the needle drops in. And go ahead and clean this carb off, or this float off a little bit. Get all that junk across there. Once again, make sure that that spot right here is the adjustment level is completely straight. Put it back down. Push that pin back in. And I just tap it with a wrench just to make sure it seats all the way in. All right, so this side is done. So we just take the old gasket off of this. So sometimes it's hard to get off. You can use a razor blade to cut it off, but be careful because you will probably hurt yourself. If there's still some left on there, you get some 400 grit sandpaper. Try to do it away from the carb so you're not getting all the dust and the things that you just cleaned. And clean up all the extra stuff. Next, we're going to put the gasket on for the float bowl. I put with the ones from Scrambler Cycler, I put the wording down. Makes it fit a little better. Sometimes it needs just a little bit of adjustment and pushing around to get it just right. You go ahead and put the float bowl back on. Go ahead and put the drain plug back in. This is why I like to do them one at a time, because I don't like mixing up parts. Just hand tight because it's brass. Alright, so we'll flip it back over. Remember, he said be very careful with this. This is the needle. This one we're just going to clean off instead of replacing. Do some carb cleaner. And you find there's a little bit of buildup on the needle, then you can use some 400 grit sandpaper and just lightly clean it off. Get as new. And then when you're dropping it in, there's a little tab on the gasket part of the diaphragm. Make sure that lines up with this spot right here, like so. I usually get it started like this, and then I pull needle nose pliers just to make sure the needle sits in the jet or in the emulsion tube. And then it should just slide just like that. You can turn it just a little bit so that that tab is in the right spot. Right there. Just make sure you push it all back down into its little seat. And then put the diaphragm cover back on. Remember the spring. Go ahead and throw the bolts back in, or the screws back in. So I don't tighten them down too hard because at the end we have to put the brackets, these back in between them. So we'll go ahead and do that at the end, but just kind of keep it so everything stays together. And last thing is the pilot jet, or the pilot needle. And the rebuild kit comes with the spring. So you just drop that in. And the rule of thumb is you just tighten it all the way down, hand tight. Get it started with your fingers because the threads are really fine. Once you got it started, the rule of thumb is you tighten it all the way down until it's hand tight, and then you back it off 1.5 turns. That'll get you in a good spot to tune your carbs. So that's finger tight, so 1.5 right there. So that's it. That's how you rebuild one of these carbs. Go ahead and do it to the other 4, and then we'll put it back on the carb here in a little bit, or put it back on the bike here in a little bit.